Welcome to a big one, episode 30 of Console Crapshoot, where we spin a wheel to play a random video game on original hardware. Something about Carl is telling me that he's very excited. Either that or he's just drooling because he's hungry, I don't know. But let's see what we're going to play for episode 30. Alright, the Nintendo 64. It's been a while since we got that one. Not since episode 9, I think. And it looks like we have 301 games on the wheel for the Nintendo 64. What? Wow. Wow. Of the 301 games we could have gotten, we got kind of the main defining game that people think about and associate with this system. That is crazy, and an amazing choice for the 30th episode. Wow, so what can I say about this game in less than 5 minutes that hasn't already been said? You know, I could retread a bunch of things that you probably already know if you were there. So instead, I think it would be more interesting to paint a picture for those of you that weren't there. Maybe you were too young, or maybe you were around, but you just missed the boat on it for whatever reason. Before I get there, first, on a personal note, this is my original cartridge with my original game save on my original Nintendo 64 that I bought from my second paycheck from my first job. I was a wagon guy at a supermarket, saved up that first check, got the second check. I had barely enough to get this Nintendo 64, Mario 64, and Shadows of the Empire. So back to painting a picture, you gotta imagine at this point in time that gamers, we were all used to 2D games, to side-scrolling games, especially with a Mario game. They were great games. They had really perfected the 2D game with Super Mario World, games like that. Nintendo was a master at its craft, and the world was sort of moving towards 3D games, but no one knew quite how to do them right. There were a bunch of attempts to varying degrees of success, but it took Nintendo's expertise and amazing attention to detail to really set the stage for 3D games in the future. And while Mario 64 hasn't necessarily aged well, we take for granted camera systems having that second analog control stick to move the camera around. The N64 didn't have that, and hardware companies and developers hadn't really thought of that yet. This was all new for them and for gamers. It was a learning process. It was a new frontier. Knowing very little about what this game was going into it, and then you turn it on and the world is alive. You hear birds tweeting in the background, and when you get closer to them, that's louder, the 3D sound. We take all that for granted now, but this was mind-blowing back then. When I realized that I could run around wherever I wanted in this 3D space, if I just wanted to go to a corner and stare at a waterfall and just run around in circles and climb a tree, it was unheard of at the time. It was so fresh and amazing. And the game knew that. It played on your sense of wonder. It knew that this was all completely new to you and you weren't going to know how to control this thing. It was like starting over even for seasoned gamers. So they wisely let you explore and spoon feed you what you need to know in stages. And there's something that Nintendo is really, really good at understanding that I'm a big believer in, and that's limitations always breed creativity. I used to help run a film festival that was built around that idea. Nowadays, game designers have the tools and the power to create whatever they want, but when you have limitations and a creator is put in a box, they're forced to think about how to make something amazing from within the confines of that box. So now if Mario 64 was made, it would probably be more of an open world. But what I mean by that is all the stages would be all on one map and not have to be separated, and there wouldn't be any loading between them. The power limitations of the N64 demanded that all these levels be pretty small and contained, so the castle serves as an overworld, and in like a stroke of genius, they made all of the other main 15 worlds behind paintings that you jump in. You jump into the paintings and then the new world loads up. Each of these worlds is pretty small, but they all have 6 different stars that you can get. The main goal of the game is to collect all these stars so that you can unlock later parts of the castle. Some of those missions would be to beat a boss, some of them would be to do a race or deliver something, but this game invented things that we don't think of now because they're just part of the lexicon. They're subconscious. The collectathon approach to game design, you know, collecting all these stars so that you can move forward. That's a big part of modern gaming. The N64 was the first system with an analog stick. There were joysticks in the past, but this was pressure sensitive, so in old Mario games you'd either be walking or running. But with this, there was all kinds of speeds. You could tiptoe up to something that was sleeping. It's so hard to explain that all of these things were completely new, and this game hit you over the head with all of these new things all at once. It was remarkable. And like I said, the game does such a stealthy job of subconsciously making you master the techniques without realizing that you're doing it. You're not practicing those techniques, and before you know it, you realize the game Miyagi'd you, you know? The movement and the controls become second nature. Now, yeah, the camera system, while super innovative back then, is kind of a pain in the ass now, and it makes you dizzy. Certain things that were considered genius and novel back then are noticeably bad now. I'll give you an example. There's always a circular black shadow under Mario. At the time, this was a genius move because it gave you another way of knowing where you were landing. But now there's dynamic lighting. The shadows are cast based on the light sources, and they're always moving. And so if you look at it with that lens, yeah, it's kind of terrible. Oh, and the first time you get the wing cap and you get to fly around these levels, it's so free. Like the constraints of what you were used to with games. And all of a sudden I could just shoot up in the air and fly around this world, this living, breathing world. It was just such a shock because of the short time that games had changed and the way that they were designed. Nowadays, it feels so incremental. Now it's just a little bit more power every generation, where we can add a little bit more. But this was sudden and jarring. I don't know if that feeling will ever happen again. I mean, maybe VR is that now, but it's just not quite the same because VR, generally the graphics are not as good as what traditional gaming is. So maybe not a good comparison. So I'm not that eloquent, but that's the best way that I can paint a limited picture of what this was like for gamers at the time. I guess now we should get to the part where we rate the game. Is this the best Mario game ever made? No, I don't think so. Is this the best N64 game ever made? Probably not. It's up there, debatable. But if there was ever a 5 out of 5, it's this. This is a masterpiece. This game redefined gaming design as we know it, and its legacy and decisions that were made during its development extend to today. It's obviously a 5 out of 5. Being spoiled by great games now, if you go back, will you get much enjoyment out of it? You might, if you can get past the graphics and the camera and maybe a little feeling of dizziness. I certainly got the dizziness, but this thing laid the groundwork, and it did so working without a net, so to speak. None of this stuff had been figured out, and they figured it out with the limited tools that they had available to them. What did you think about Mario 64? Share your memories about it with me. I honestly would love to hear them. I could not think of a better game we could have gotten for a 30th episode. Let's hope fate is as kind next week. Thanks, everyone. See you then.